Alright, in this lesson we're going to be taking a look at the material editor for 3ds Max. Now, this is not going to be a cover-all lesson for the material editor. Like all of the other lessons inside of this VTM, it's going to be introductory. The material editor itself could be a VTM unto itself.
Oh, that's for sure.
It's a very deep tool inside of 3ds Max, so I'm just going to get you introduced to it and comfortable with it so you can go ahead and start applying materials to your objects. But first of all, what exactly is a material?
Well, basically, it's just the color or texture of your object.
Absolutely. It's like the paint that you apply to an object after you're done constructing it. So let's go ahead and bring up the material editor. At the very end of my toolbar, I've got the material editor button, or I can press M on the keyboard as a hotkey. And the material editor is broken up into three major sections. These are the sample slots, the toolbar, and the parameters area. Let's start off by having a look at the sample slots. Right now you can see all these different slots, and essentially these are all showing different materials. If I click on this one, you'll notice it's named 1 default. If I click on the next one, it's named 2 default, and so on. Now, I can look at these different materials in a variety of different ways, I should say, by changing my sample type. Sample type right now is a sphere, as you can see here. If I come over to my toolbar, I can set this over to a cylinder, or I can set it over to a cube. Also, I can rotate around my material. So if I hold down the middle mouse button, you see I can rotate around it and see what it looks like from several different angles.
Very cool.
But if I right-click on my sample slot, we're going to get a variety of options. First one we have is drag copy, which is on by default. Let me kind of make some sort of change to this material. Don't worry too much about what I'm doing. I will be covering a little bit later. I've just made this material red. Now with drag copy activated, I can take this object, and let's say I make an object in my scene like a sphere, and I can just take the material itself and drag it right onto the object, and it copies it right onto the object. It applies it right there. Also though, I can drag into other material slots and copy the material off like that. Now,
so it's not an instance, it's just a plain copy.
It's an entirely separate copy. If I come into the new one and make its color some sort of blue, you'll see that the original one did not change. So obviously this is not an instance relationship. Alright, also though, I want to make sure I make something clear. The name of this material is 1 default. The name of the original material is 1 default.
So materials can have the same name.
They can have the same name, but you can run into problems later if they do. So just make sure that you do end up changing these. As a rule of thumb, anytime you're working with a material, you should name it. So this one I'm going to go ahead and just name my material. I can't spell, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I never learned to read. No, I'm sorry. That's awful. Okay, so from here, if I right-click again, we have drag rotate. Now, this means that you can no longer just drag and copy a material. It just means that you can rotate exactly as you did with the middle mouse button. Now, personally, I see this as a little bit redundant if you could already do it with the middle mouse, but if you don't want to accidentally drag and copy off a material, it can be very handy. But for now, I'm going to leave this at drag and copy. Down from that, we have reset rotation, which will reset any rotations we might have applied to the sample object. Underneath this, we have the options window, which I won't be dwelling on too much, but it'll give us a few things that we can change about the material editor as far as its functionality and how it appears. And down from this, we have magnify. Now, this is another preview window, if you will. You cannot rotate this one, but this is a full-out render of your material that you can resize as you need to. So I can make this huge. And you'll notice that any changes I make to the material itself, let's move this window out of the way, are applied immediately inside of this window. Now at first, that sounds like a really cool thing. But
well, it is cool.
It is cool. It is a very cool thing. But at the same time, if we had a material that was very heavy, maybe it had a lot of maps on it, maybe it just took a long time for a computer to render, or, heaven forbid, we had a slow computer.
Ooh.
Then we might not want this to update automatically, because what this means is every single setting we change will cause this window to update. And sometimes you could be waiting 3, 4, and 5 seconds every time you tweak something. So that adds up. In this kind of a case, you would want to uncheck auto, and then you can make your changes like so, and whenever you're done changing things around, you can click update and see how it's going to look. So just sort of a performance issue there with the preview window. Alright, so down from here we have the different layouts for the sample window. Right now it's set to 3x2, and indeed if we look, we do have 3x2, which is
6, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Alright, that'll work. Anyway, we have 3x2, which Joel says is 6. We can... I can't keep a straight face. We can come down and choose 5x3, 4x15, and then also come down and choose 6x4. Now, here's a 6x4. This shows 24. Now, these are all of the slots that we have in the material editor. We only have 24.
You mean we can only put 24 materials in our scene?
Absolutely not.
That's a good thing.
Yes, we can have as many materials in a scene as we want, but we can only have 24 active in the material editor's editing slots. Which means, in a sense, if you just want to put it simply, we can only edit up to 24 materials at a time, which is actually quite a lot.
Yes, it is.
So how do we go about having a material that is in our scene but not inside of our editor? Well, there's a couple of ways to do it. One is that we could come in here, let's go back to 3x2 for a total of 6. And let's just have a look. Right here we have this slot with our red material, which as you can see is applied in our scene. I have several options if I want to get rid of this slot. One, I have this little X button down here, which is going to allow me to reset this specific slot. If I click it, I get a little pop-up that says, would you like to affect this in the scene and in the editor, or only in the editor? So let's go ahead and make it affect only the material map in the editor slot. Click OK, and look at this. It's reset. In fact, the name has changed. It's now material number 25. That means this slot has now been overwritten. If I look around, that red material now no longer exists anywhere. In fact, let's go ahead and just jump back to 6x4. The red material is gone.
Completely gone. And yet our sphere is still red.
Absolutely. So the material exists in our scene, but not inside of our material editor. So don't let that scare you. Don't let that freak you out. It's perfectly acceptable and very common. So let's go ahead and jump back in here. We got 6x4. Let's just leave that at 3x2 for now so everybody can see what's going on. And here's our original slot. Now, there is a way to get things back. Let's say you've got a material that is in your scene, and you need to get it into one of these slots so that you can edit it around a bit. There's a few ways you can do this as well. You can select your object, and there's a Get Material button down here on the toolbar. We click on this, and it asks where would you like to get the material from. If we click on the Scene radio button, we have My Material, which is just floating here in the scene, and voila, we get it right back where it was. Now, there's a couple of different ways to do that. Actually, I meant to say that there were a few ways to clear out a slot as well, and I only showed one. Also, you saw earlier how I can copy off slots into other slots. If I copy over and overwrite the slot, it clears out the exact same way. It's just got another copy of the number 7 material in it. So let's go ahead and I'll show you the second way to get materials back in. We have this eyedropper tool, which I can click on, and then just click on any object in my scene, and it brings the material right in.
Very nice.
So just a quick thing there on how we can get materials into and out of the editor, because if you have a very large scene, it's highly unlikely that all of your materials are going to be inside the editor at one time. A quick note, though. If the material is not inside your editor, is only on an object in your scene, so let's just go ahead and clear it out of here again. What happens if I delete my object?
The material goes too.
Yes, the material's completely gone. I can no longer access it. So be really careful of that doesn't bite you. If you only have the material existing on an object in your scene and you delete that object, the material's toast. Or gone. Whatever.
Yeah, that would be a bad thing.
So let me go ahead and undo that to bring that back, and I'll just use my eyedropper tool to get it back into my scene. Alright, so let me, that's really all I want to talk about the sample slots. Let's go ahead and have a look at the toolbars. Up here at the top of the toolbar, we have the sample type, which you already saw me adjust. Let me set this back to a sphere for now. Down from here, we have the backlight, which if you watch the back side of my sphere, it's just going to switch this little backlight on and off. I usually leave it on. It just looks pretty cool. Then down from here, we have the background, which is really only going to come into play if we bring down the opacity of our object. So you can see as we make our object more transparent, we can start to see this background.
Also, it's really useful if you have like refraction on your object.
Absolutely, which we're not going to be talking about now because we're not really talking about ray tracing. But yes, if you had refraction, you would see the refraction take place here in the sample window. Now, a quick note: if you don't really like the way the background looks, you can go into your options window and you have custom background where you can load in a bitmap or whatever you like. So just a quick note there, because I mean, I use this standard background. I think it's very nice to have all the different colors to contrast against. But it's like every time I demonstrate this, the first question I get is like, can we get a different background? That's just too ugly. So anyway, that's how you can do that. Now, for the next thing, let me go ahead and apply a quick map to our object. I'm just going to apply a checker. Don't worry too much about what I just did. I'll be demonstrating it here momentarily. So here's the checker on our object. The next button down on our toolbar is Sample UV Tiling. Right now our UV tiling is 1 by 1. So we have 1 unit of the texture and 1 unit of the texture. If I take this, I can set it to 2 by 2, and you see I do get some more checkers, and then 3 by 3, and finally 4 by 4. So you can see how it would look if you were to sample or tile the map over and over. So let's go ahead and set this back to 1 by 1. Next from here, let's go ahead and just jump to another slot. We have the Video Check button. Now, this is actually pretty cool. What this is going to allow you to do is tell whether or not a color will appear in video. So let me take maybe my diffuse color and we'll make it some bright puke, neon green, just...
Something ugly.
Yeah, well, no, it was cool back in '92, but anyway, moving right along, or maybe it wasn't even then. I just dated myself.
Oh,
anyway,
wow.
Let me take my color self-illumination, which I'm not going to be talking about a great deal, but I'll set that to a bright green as well. And let's bring our specular level up. Just crank this up through the floors, bring our glossiness. And let's activate our video check, and look what happens to our material.
It turns black.
It turns black. Very scary.
That is scary.
What this means is any pixels that are black inside of your, when you have video check activated, will not display when you actually like put it on a TV, for example. It means like a television or video could not show these colors. It's a good thing to know if you're about to make a demo reel or anything like that. In fact, here's a good example. Only these areas, these pixels up here in this area would not render out. If you're making a demo reel, most demo reels today are still on videotape. And so they're still going to be done with a VCR and a television. So you're not going to want these colors to be inside your scene at all.
That's right.
So you want to avoid those at all costs, especially if you're working for video. So just be aware of that. All right, down from here we have Make Preview. Now, if we have an animated texture, and I'm not going to demonstrate actually animating a texture or anything like that, but if we did have an animated texture, we could click on this button and render out a quick scene where our little preview object here would just show us the texture or the material in animation form. So maybe if you could make a material move across an object or anything like that. Just any of these parameters that you animated. As a quick example, we could animate, say, the opacity of an object, and as time passed, it would eventually go completely transparent.
Right.
So, enough about that. Down from here, we have the Options button, which is going to bring up the Options menu, which you've already seen. Then we have Select by Material for selecting objects in our scene by their material. Then we have the Material Map Navigator, which I'll be bringing up again here in just a moment. And what this is going to do is, actually I have it minimized in here in the bottom of my scene. Let's go ahead and bring that back up. Thank you. Hello. How's it going? And what this is going to do is give us a list of all of our materials and the maps attached to them. And I'll be using this guy a little bit here later. So, let's see. Down from here, we have the bottom toolbar. Now, quick thing. Here's our material. It is applied to our object. But our material seems to be textured with a checker.
Scary. Why am I not seeing that in the viewport?
I know, isn't it freaky? Aren't you scared?
I'm scared.
I'm scared too,
I want
man.
my mommy.
Okay, I can't help you there. Quit it. Okay, what we can do, though, is make this map visible in the viewport. So it says Show Map in the viewport. We click this button, and voila. We can now see our checker map right here inside of our viewport. Now, a quick thing, because I get asked this from time to time, believe it or not. If you rotate an object in your sample slot, it will not rotate it in the viewport as well. So I've heard people say, oh, why doesn't it rotate the texture around? Because that's not how it works. This is just a sample. So anyway, let's go ahead and we can switch that on and off. As you can see, next to here we have Material Effects channel, which I won't be talking about. That's mostly for video post effects. We have Put to Library. If we have a material that we're really attached to, and we can't put it in the material editor anymore, we've got all of our 24 slots, and we don't know what to do. What we can do is take one that we already really like, and if we don't want it to potentially get deleted from our scene, we can save it to Max's library and use it again later. So very handy feature. We can copy off materials just like we did earlier when we dragged over. You saw how we can reset material slots. Also, we can assign materials to a selection. So let's say I've got this green material on here and I want to put the the checker back on here. I can select the checker and then click on the Assign Material to Selection button.
Yeah, just in case you have a lot of objects in your scene and it's hard to drag and drop.
Absolutely, or maybe you don't have drag copy activated. Maybe you've got drag rotate activated. So you can't just drag and drop right onto an object. You have to use the Assign Material to Selection button. So just a quick thing there. And then we have Get Material, which you saw me demonstrate a minute ago. So down from here we have all of our material parameters. Now, these go on forever. You saw the color picker button a moment ago, and you've seen me demonstrate the name. Please name your materials. There's nothing more frustrating than coming in behind somebody to help them work on a project, and every material in their scene is 27 default, 28 default, 29 default. It just goes on and on forever, and you don't know what's what, where it's applied, or anything. And it's crazy. So don't do it. Name all of your materials, please. Next to this, we have the material type. Now, a word just in advance, I'm only going to be talking about the standard material. But if you click on this button, you do have access to all the other material types in Max. We have the ink and paint for toon shaders, we have ray trace materials, and so on and so on. So like I said, I'll just be leaving it on standard, but if you want to check out some of these on your own, this is where you have access to them. Now, inside of here, we have the shader basic parameters. Now, a shader is really only going to control one thing. What does a shader really control there, Joel?
The color.
No, that's wrong. You failed. No,
I failed.
I'm just giving you a hard time. Actually, you could argue that it has the color, but mostly the shader is going to affect specularity.
Right.
It's going to be how light plays off of the surface. So if we come down and we
have...
Oh,
I see what you mean.
Yeah, I'm over here in the shader basic parameters. Welcome back.
Yay.
We have all of these different methods to calculate our specularity. Right now I'm set to Blinn, so I can bring up my specular level, and it's based off a specific algorithm, which was actually written by a guy named Blinn, believe it or not. But we can come down and we have several different types of shaders. We have anisotropic, which is good for brushed metals and things like that have microscopic grooves in them, like the bottom of a CD or something like that. Blinn, which can give you metallic or even glossy effects. We have metal, which kind of speaks for itself.
Just a little.
Right. We have Phong, and the list goes on and on. So check some of these out. I'm not going to go one by one through all of them. Now, next to this, we have some various parameters we can access for a shader. The first one is wire. If we click this, all of a sudden our shader becomes a wire shader. Notice a couple of things. One, we can no longer see our map on it, so the wires do appear red and shaded. But if we render this out, we do indeed just see wires. Let me come in here and just rotate around, put this in the middle of the screen.
Ah, very nice.
And the texture is still there. So the map is still in place. So we've got white wires and black wires. So pretty cool. Then from here we can just... Oh, a quick thing. I'm not going to be dwelling on the extended parameters. I'm just going to mention them only in passing. But you can use these to adjust your wire width. So if you've already got a wire shader you're using and need to change the size of your wires, you can crank these up to as many pixels as you need, or units if you prefer. And so if I render this out, you can see my wires are quite a bit thicker. Let's crank them up again, maybe something like 7. And you see my wires just keep getting thicker and thicker. So just a cool thing there for you to experiment with. For now, let me leave that set at 1 by default, and we'll come on to our next object. We have, next to wire, we have two-sided. And actually, this will be easier to demonstrate if I leave wire activated. Right now, if I render this, there's something kind of strange going on here. In fact, let me do a quick thing. Don't pay attention to what I'm doing right now because I might confuse you. I'm going to take my diffuse color, my map here, and just bring its amount down. This will make my object appear red. I'll be talking about this here in just a moment. But if I render this guy out, there's something very curious going on here. Joel, can you tell me what it is?
I can't really see the other side, the wires on the other side.
Exactly. Max is ignoring all of the back faces because by default you'll notice even in the viewport back faces do not show. Now we can activate a two-sided material, and now look at this. All of a sudden we can see the back wires even here in the viewport. So if I switch that on and off, you can see that. And as we render, you'll see now I can see the wires from behind as well. So now it really looks like we got kind of a wire globe sort of thing, a spherical cage. Oh, pretty cool, yeah?
Yeah, very cool.
All right, so let's switch both of these off. And let me bring my amount back up to 100. So we have our nice checker texture back on here. Now we have our face map. Now what this is going to do is take whatever your map is and apply it to every single face of your object. So in this case, we have a little 2x2 checker applied to the entire object. If we activate face map, we have a 2x2 checker applied to every single face of the object. So you can see in this case, our checker gets a lot more dense. Also, we have faceted, and this is actually going to speak for itself. Let me go ahead and just render this. So
it's basically the opposite of smooth.
All right, that's with faceted off. Here's with faceted on, and I'll re-render. You can see the facets.
How surprising.
Anyway, it allows you to see all of the separate faces of an object very quickly and easily without having to deal with smoothing groups or anything like that. So let's go ahead and switch that off. Now let's jump down here into the blend's basic parameters. Now, these parameters are going to be different based on the type of shader you select. So we're only going to be covering blend. Now, the blend, our material in this case, is going to give us access to 3 separate colors. These are the 3 main colors of your object. They are ambient, diffuse, and specular. So what's the difference between them? Well, ambient is going to be the color at the darkest point of your object. Now, diffuse is just going to be the basic color of your object. So if you have like a red ball, diffuse will just be red. In most cases, these 2 colors are going to be the same. So often, in fact, that by default, Max locks them together. So you see this little button here. What this means is that these 2 colors are locked. And as I change one, you'll notice the other changes right along with it. Let me come back in here. I'm going to pull my amount back down on my diffuse color just to get rid of my checker for just a moment. And let's have a look at this. If I unlock these, I can make the ambient, say, another color. And if I were to render this out, maybe this is not the best example in the world. Anyway, just suffice to say that you can get some really crazy combinations of colors as you work with this. So maybe if you want to experiment with that, but 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, these 2 will be locked together. Finally, we have specular. Now, what do you think specular is going to control?
Well, maybe the specular highlight color?
Absolutely, the little hotspot highlight we have. If I render this right now, we do see this highlight. Let me tighten it up a little bit. So we'll increase our glossiness just to sharpen that up, and I'll re-render this. So we have this little white spot here. That's our specular highlight. Right now, our specular color is white, and so is our highlight. Curious. So maybe if I take our specular color instead of some shade of blue, and we re-render this guy, check out our new highlight. So it looks like maybe there's some sort of blue light kind of hitting this. Actually kind of a crazy black light kind of look.
Yeah.
Almost. Kind of cool. Anyway, so you can change the color of your specular highlight inside of this color picker. Next to this we have self-illumination, which I'm not going to be dwelling on too much, but if you had an object that needed to look like it was actually emitting light, let me bring my checker back up. It's unnerving to have it showing one thing here and another thing in the viewport. So we'll have self-illumination. This is where an object can look like it's emitting light. And you can see up here in my preview, as I bring this all the way up to 100%, my object appears to get brighter. And if I render, I no longer get shadows if my self-illumination is at 100%. So what this means is it gives the appearance that an object is emitting light. So if you were doing maybe a light bulb, no shadows should ever fall on a light bulb because it's emitting light. So this is where you'd set that up. But just a quick note that this does not mean your object will actually emit light in your scene.
You can't put this sphere in your scene and expect it to light your whole scene.
Absolutely. So just be aware of that. Also, you can choose a color for self-illumination if you activate this checkbox, but we're not really going to be going into all that. Let me set this back down to 0. And then we have opacity. So opacity is going to be how opaque our object is, as you might imagine, and I demonstrated this a second ago. Let me activate my background, and as I bring down opacity, you'll notice our object begins to get transparent. So pretty cool. If we bring it down to complete, all we see is a little specular highlight. So this thing's almost like a really, really thin glass. So down from here, we have our specular highlight setting. This is where we can control how our specularity looks. Let me zero both these out real quick. we'll take our specular level and bring it up, and we get this graph. You can kind of imagine this as a cross-section of your specular highlight, with the highest point being the brightest area and the lowest point being the dimmest area. So if this is a nice broad curve, you have a big, fat specular highlight. Let me demonstrate over here on the green material I have here on the side. So we'll bring this up, and you see I have this big, fat, white specular highlight. Then I have glossiness. Now, this is giving us the look of being kind of metallic, a big, bright, shiny surface. As I bring up glossiness, you'll notice that our specular highlight tightens, and our graph gets tighter as well. And now we start to get sort of a plasticky kind of look, or maybe a wet look, if you will. Then you can soften this up subtly by adjusting the soften. So down from here, as we move on, we have super sampling. I'm not going to be covering this. Suffice to say, this is a way to anti-alias your textures. If you're starting to get jagged edges inside of your textures, that's about as far as I'll take that. We have extended parameters, which I also mentioned that I wouldn't be talking about too much. We already showed how you have the wire size and whatnot. It also has some advanced transparency parameters that we're not going to be talking about, and some reflection parameters, if you will. Next, down to this, we have maps. Now, maps is where all of the big magic happens as far as materials go. This is where all of the important things are going to occur as far as materials inside of your scene. Let me come over here to a new material, and let's rename this. Wasn't that
original?
Absolutely. So this is our new material. And let's come down here and let's look at all of our maps. Next to every single one of these slots, we have a map button, where we can apply things. Like you saw me apply a checker map to our diffuse color earlier before. So I can do the same thing here, something similar. I can choose, say, the diffuse color, click on my map button, and here's a list of all the maps I can apply. Now, regardless of how many things that you see here, there are two types of maps inside of Max. There are procedurals and files. Procedurals are going to be calculated through mathematic algorithms. The checker is an example of this. We have various settings we can control in our checker, and I'll be talking about these here in a bit. We also have files, where we can just grab, say, a bitmap, or a JPEG, or a Targa, or whatever you like, and apply that to our object as a map. We've already seen a checker, which is a procedural, so let me demonstrate a file, or a bitmap. Let's come in here. I'm inside of my maps folder, inside of 3ds Max 5. So let's jump back in here to space, where I was a second ago, and let's choose Earth Map. And we'll hit open, and look at my object down here.
Very cool.
We have what looks like a globe. So this file map has just been applied to the diffuse channel of our object. Now, a quick thing. I mentioned this earlier. We have the Material Map Navigator. If I click on this, this is going to take whatever material I have selected and show me the hierarchical list of all of the maps within it. So here's new material that I have earlier. Down from this, inside of its diffuse color, is map number 2, or Earth Map. Let's go ahead and select map number 2, and I can come down and see all of its parameters. So here's the bitmaps parameters, all of the things I can adjust about it, and I won't be showing all of these because these parameters would go on forever if I were to show all of them for every single map. I can apply noise to this if I need to, and I can adjust its coordinates as far as U and V are concerned. So just a quick thing, let me go ahead and rename this. We'll call this Earth Map. And so you can see the name also update over here. The great thing about the Material Map Navigator is I can use this at any time to sort through my materials or their various maps as what's actually inside of them. So a very handy tool to have. Anytime I'm working extensively with materials, this guy's open right next to me. I always use the Material Map Editor. Highly recommend that you do as well. So let's come back in here and keep looking at our maps. Over here on the left side, we have these checkboxes. Now, these are going to be kind of like on-off switches for each one of these maps. So if I check this off, you'll notice my diffuse color disappears. In this case, our little Earth map goes away. But also, on the other side, we have this amount spinner. Now, what this will do is give us the amount at which this map is visible. Right now, it's 100, so it's 100% visible. As I pull this down, you'll notice our original color starts to bleed through until we get back down to 0, and we don't see our map at all. We just see the original color. Now, the cool thing is that we can map to almost any one of our attributes, any of our parameters inside of our window. And if we scroll back up, we'll notice next to diffuse, there's a little button which now has an M in it. That means it's been mapped to. Next to self-illumination, there's a map button. Next to specular, there's a map button, and so on and so on. We can map to almost anything we can think of as far as materials are concerned. So let's say I wanted to add a bump map to the Earth. I can click on the None button and choose, let's say I can click, and I can choose any one of these maps out of here, procedural, file, whatever. Or I can take a map that already exists and I can drag it down into any one of these slots. And as soon as I let go, I'm going to ask Max is going to ask me if I want this to be an instance, a copy, or if I just want to swap the two maps out.
So basically, if we had an instance, if we modify the one texture, the other map's going to be changed as well.
Absolutely. Copy, they're going to be independent of each other. And if I hit swap and click OK, all of a sudden the map is down here and the guy up here is now none.
Very cool.
You see how that's going to adjust. Let's go ahead and set him back up to diffuse, and we'll swap those two out. Then I'll drag the Earth map down here to bump, and let's go ahead and make this an instance and click OK. And then I'm going to take the amount of bump, which by default is at 30. I'm just going to crank it up really, really high. And I can hear Jolie's like, what are you doing? And then let's go ahead and render this out and see what we get. Actually, let's apply it to the object.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, no, we'll drag it and drop it right on. We can make this visible in the viewport if we want to, so that, let's refresh our window, we can actually see the planet Earth. Pretty cool.
Definitely.
And even though I wasn't really going to talk about it too much, let's bring up just a little bit of self-illumination so we can see the thing just a little bit better. And then let's render this out.
Oh, very nice.
And we have this nice big planet Earth. And you can't really see it too much in the video. Maybe if I bring self-illumination back down.
Oh, that's a lot better.
We're starting to see a little bit of a bumpy edge around the Earth. Probably a better way to bring it up would be to take our specular level up. And let's increase our glossiness. And now if we render one more time...
very cool.
Look at that. You can start to see how our continents look actually embossed out of our object. So we're taking our map, which was originally just driving diffuse, and we're using it to drive bump as well. So really, with that, that's about all I'm really going to cover inside of this video. I mean, we've covered a lot of stuff. We've got people nice and comfortably introduced so they can start making their own materials and start texturing their scenes inside of 3ds Max. Don't you agree?
Yes, definitely.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close this up. So thanks a lot, everyone.